So welcome back to the HOOA podcast. It's been a long time. Truth be told, I don't have a lot of incentive to do these things, but I was reading up on something very important. This is about, yeah, it's more like a topic that I usually don't discuss. So after like a couple minutes, if this is not your cup of tea, you will find out by yourself. To discuss this heavy topic, I brought like a good friend of mine, and if he'd like, he can introduce himself right now.
Yeah, so I'm Jack Peach. You may or may not know me off Twitter. Me and Fury running a few of the same circles. So yeah, I'm actually a relationship coach nowadays, but we're going to be talking a bit more about some of my other work, I think, by the sounds of it, some of the deeper stuff.
Yeah. Recently I read Jack's book, Weaponized Sex, How Feminism is an Assault on Women. The reason why I wanted to talk about this because I've read a lot of books this year, but not a book like that. I've seen I've seen people hint at these things on my timeline. I don't like to follow these types of people because if you get too bogged down on this, you can get really stuck into it. Like it gets like droning on and on in your head. But I thought it's important to, even just for once, if I can reach one person to unplug them, make them aware of these things, it's very important to do this like on this channel.
Yeah, man, I actually completely get you with you got to be careful with your mind space with these people, like in these thoughts and ideas, because it can be something that really sucks you down a deep rabbit hole and can mess with your head a little bit. I think that's actually a big problem a lot of people fall into, actually, especially if they are like alone or like don't have family close to them. I think you can fall into a bit of a dark place actually when you do that, and you end up going down these little rabbit holes and you follow the threads, and then it goes into all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm lucky. I've got my wife. She pulls me out of it. I'll talk to her about this stuff, and she'll be like, "Okay, let's just go get a coffee somewhere." And I'll be like, "Okay, that's probably a good idea." So
Yeah, I can imagine the darkness of it because, like for example, like the big question that I had, there was like a recurring theme in your book, is like I want to ask you like how do you feel like how has feminism led to exploitation of women?
So the general principle is that it kind of starts with biology, which is why the book starts with a whole chapter on like, sex and the biology of sex, not gender, and how there are biological mandates between how men and women act, and these come out in all kinds of ways. Like I talk about this in my coaching as well, but I don't really talk about this aspect of it.
Yeah.
But one of those things is that men are just physically stronger than women. Like that has now become some kind of controversial statement, but anybody with half a brain can see it's true.
Yeah.
So, and then part of that means that if a man wants to, he can basically overpower a woman, right? And historically we know this for numerous different ways. Go back from kidnapping to rape, or the historical nature of sex slaves that have always existed.
Yeah.
And we have this still today. Basically, it's just been transformed and translated into a different way now. And it all comes down to that physical strength of men,
Sure.
Right? And because men are physically stronger than women actually need other men to protect them from the dangerous men.
100%.
Right? And traditionally we had systems put in place, whether it be the family, men in the family, tribal settings, whether it would be within an extended tribe, where the men would take care of the daughters, the women, their nieces, whoever it might be, and keep them protected from dangerous men. And feminism has loosened those strengths, those defense mechanisms, those protection mechanisms, and has outsourced the protection to the state. Now, in some ways, this has been good. Like, I'm not going to say it's all bad, right? The state has been able to, we have been able to stop some things, and there have been like cultural advances that have also prevented some other things, which is positive. But by outsourcing it to the state, we've removed the instant accountability towards men and women. And if you actually look at, statistics regarding rape and other crimes in terms of conviction rates and other things, actually it's easier probably to get away with it now with less consequences than it was in the past. Now,
100%.
Now that's the problem. You can't get the instant response of the community. And part of what triggered me to this was living in a less in a society which is not feminist at all.
Yeah.
In a traditional religious society.
Triggered inside you. You realized, hey, wait a minute, what the fuck is going on? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I saw this in action with other people. Like when you live in Indonesia, which is where I lived for quite a while, which is a strongly Muslim country, and is still got a state and everything. But if you're a thief in Indonesia, you're taking the risk of the mob.
Yeah.
Like as soon as if someone shouts it out, it's instant mob justice.
Yeah.
And that is an instant deterrent. Now it doesn't always work, and there's still criminals, obviously, but it is a form of justice, and I think that's been taken away. And there's another element towards this, which is probably more insidious, which I talk about later in the book, but maybe we'll talk about that later in terms of the culture around sex.
Yeah, for sure. No, but I really liked what you said. It's like the loosening of the barriers, the extended tribe, you could say the cloak, the protection, is gone. What you described, I personally come from cultures like that as well. I don't talk about it, but I know these things that this is why this strictness is needed. It's for the protection act. And what most people seem to miss is what you've just described, that the feminism is loosening this. Of course, some people don't know that they're doing this like on accident, that it's not on purpose. Maybe for some people that go into more like females need more rights and stuff like that. That's fine, But this was the crux. What was really scary to me, like, hey, wait a fucking minute. It's actually, I don't want to sound like that, but it's actually fucking easy. They can get away with this fucking shit, and that I don't like.
Oh yeah.
I
mean, anyone who's hung around in a clubbing scene will know this. Like anyone who's been anywhere near the clubbing scene, I know, like my past, right? Fiona's one of the few people kind of knows my past, right, in terms of regards to that. And I used to be a big partier. And if you're anything involved with those kind of scenes, you see these guys, these predators who just get away with it. It's well known within those scenes, and it's become, we have these kind of gray zones, like, or a liminal space between like mainstream culture and the underworld, and then there's also this gray space, right, which clubs form part of. And within those spaces, it is very predatory. There are not everyone there is obviously doing it, but there are 100% there are predators operating in those spaces, and they become more and more normalized, more and more acceptable, and more people are encouraged to go to them, and girls are encouraged to go to them from a young age. And in the past, we would not allow them to go to these places. We just simply wouldn't. Men, their father, their husband, their brothers, if they saw a woman in that place, the shame attached to that would be very, very great. And it's not all about necessarily like physical protection. It's also about the shame culture and the social pressure that stops people from doing this as well.
Yeah, because what most people don't understand is that with shame culture, they're thinking, oh, he's slut shaming, blah, blah. In my opinion, that's kind of good, because through shaming, honor also exists. There's in shame cultures also honor culture, and that seems to be missing, where the family and the tradition and the image that you portray is extremely important. And this is why, actually.
Yeah, 100%. I like that. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but you're right. Like honor, the opposite or the reflection of shame is honor, right? So if you can act in a good way, and these things incentivize people to act better as well.
Right.
Like this is the thing. Like I talk about this in the book as well, about like sex is a big motivation for men. It's not the only motivation. It's not even the biggest motivation. But to argue that sex isn't a prime motivation for men is again, it's lunacy to argue that it's not. Yeah. And when this is part of the attack of feminism on women, when there's been a loosening of, it's easier to get access to sex without going through certain hoops that cause your progression, that cause you to be a better man, a more successful man, a more characterful man before you get sex through a marriage. Then
heavy dowries. You have to bring fucking horses. You have to go to fucking war and say, hey, I'm the fucking man,
Exactly, man. And like a dowry as well, like, and even the whole process of a wedding is a vetting process in a traditional cultural society. It's meant to be stressful. It's meant to be hard to test how the man responds to stress and difficulty. How does he respond in speaking in front of 30 elders who are deciding whether he's a suitable man to get married to this woman? Is he able to stand up and speak well, or is he able to do it even though it's hard for him? But does he still do it, go through it? Does he go through the processes? Does he find solutions to issues? Does he deal with bringing two families together? How well can he manage this interaction? How well can the families manage it? And through that, you're proving whether he is ready to get married, because a man who needs marriage is not some easy, light process that you just get into and then suddenly it's all easy. You know, I'm a relationship coach. Like, I coach guys through this. It's hard. Marriage is hard. You know, monogamy is hard. And being a husband is a hard role. So we traditionally had all these different processes that kind of were hoops that men had to jump through to get married. And now we don't have any of them.
Yeah, it's a perfect reward system if you think about it. You sketch it as well. It's like a form of solution to go to a new society or go back to how it was before, in the sense that this is necessary instead of this degenerate shit that's going on from both sides. You know, I'm not pointing fingers, especially the male side, because I have my own share in these things. That's why I'm so involved in it. I understand it from both sides, actually, is that there's no fucking consequence. It's just like, it's like free for all. It's like shoot 'em up, you know, like when you're playing a game, you know, there's no consequence, you know. But it's definitely I just want to stress loud how important the role of the family unit is. Like, how important do you think this, what you just described, this family unit on a microcosm, is important for the macrocosm that is society? How do you see that?
Yeah, incredibly important. It's the families are the building blocks of society, you know. And the heart of the family is a relationship between a man and woman. And the heart of having a good relationship means that both of these people are somewhat virtuous, a man and a woman, in different ways. A woman's virtue is different from a man's virtue, but both of them have to have this element of virtue to create the healthiest family. But then, it's how do you connect with the extended family, and how do they connect with each other? And then it's the environment that you raise children in. And then when those children are raised in it, how are they going to then be members of society? Because that's what every child is. It's a potential member of society. I mean, it's not a potential member. It is a member of society. So when you, and it's very clear, okay, the evidence is very clear. The statistics are very clear when it comes to people who are not raised in strong homes. And then raised in single parent homes, you can see it. But I'm sure you can even see it with people who have weaker relationships between their parents compared to people who have stronger relationships between their parents. Even within those, you can see there tends to be a difference. But the statistics, the stark statistics between men and women raised in single parent homes and those raised in dual parent homes is very, very significant when it comes to things like drug use, crime, achievement, income when they get older, their own marriages as they get older. So marriage and family is really, really, really crucial. And also taking care of people as well. You know, like, one of the things about the West is, I always say, you wouldn't have nursing homes in the West if people have more than one kid or two kids.
That's true. Because
in traditional societies where you have a lot of kids, there's going to be one kid who doesn't achieve as much as the others. That's just human nature. We're not all equal. We're not ants in a mine where we're all worker ants. We have different people have different levels, and within every family there will be someone who will be more nurturing or less capable in the external world, and these people would be the ones who would end up taking care of their parents. They're the ones who'd end up living in with their parents as they're older. Maybe they never got married, but they still served a vital social role in doing that. Whereas now we have the situation where, like, even me, you know, I'm an only child, and like the likelihood of me looking after my parents when they're older is pretty slim. Like, I don't even live in the same country as them, unfortunately, and it's, you know, I can't necessarily give up my successful life for that. Maybe that's selfish, some people would say, but historically, the person who looks after children is not the high achieving son. it's either the daughter who didn't get married, or it's the man who was unable to ascend into the true masculine role, go through those hoops required to get married, and maybe they would look after their parents. And that's just the unfortunate reality. You can say that that's morally
no, I get it,
but
because there's like a bigger balance going on. Even what you just, all these little things that marriage is like a vetting process for a man, but also what is in the book is that through monogamy is that, for example, what's happening now, I'm always like with Darwinism, like the winner takes all, but what's happening now is that these days the low status men, they don't they don't get women sometimes. Whereas with the monogamous system, what you hinted at in the book, it's more regularly distributed. And the reason why this is good, then you don't have these like filthy predator shit going on. Because what you said, sex is a prime motivator, you know? You can imagine like if this is really exaggerated, 80% of guys aren't getting women, and all these other guys, these elite, all these sexual predators getting all these women. What the fuck do you think is going to happen with society if these guys can't get laid, you know, if they get fucked up in their head or can't have children, if they have want to have families, you know, that are very important people as well, very important guys, you know? That's, it's so important, this whole balance, all these little mini trickling effects that are unnoticed right now or something. For some reason people are not seeing this shit, you know?
yeah, I mean, culture and society is super multivariate. That's what makes it so hard to analyze, right? It's there's so many different variables that come in and mean that you can't necessarily isolate like one thing, how this causes this, right? And that doesn't mean though that we can't kind of see the overall arching, like this is what one of my greatest arguments in the book is, like, just look at the trajectory, forget about all the details, right? When we talk about some of the other stuff, you know, like forget about like what maybe I'm wrong about this, but just look at the overarching trajectory that we're moving in, right? In terms of atomization. And one of the things you mentioned there is when people do, certain men monopolize access to women, like in a traditionally polygamous society, you get like an underclass of men who then can't get their status through marriage, can't get their satisfaction, their sexual satisfaction through marriage, and they end up going into different forms to find that. Now, this can often be violence, or it can be predatory sexual behavior as well, and it fundamentally destabilizes civilization. Or the society. And this is, again, you can see the evidence today. The I think it's 18, I can't remember, 18 or 19 of the 20 most dangerous countries in the world are all polygamous. And like when there's that stark of a difference, and there's that stark of a, you know, there's a very connecting factor here between them, it does call into question, like, why is that? And there are, you know, reasons you can give, which I kind of just laid out there.
So what are more of like the negative effects of feminism on like women, men, and subsequently culture? We've touched about it a little bit on it already, but there were more things in the book, like mental health and lots of things that you mentioned. Can you go a little bit deeper in that?
Yeah, I mean, mental health is the big one, I think. Like, so I think we could link more like feminism in one particular aspect in terms of the sexual revolution aspect of feminism, rather than maybe like women working or something like that. We'll kind of focus on that. And by the way, actually, historically, women have always worked. By the way, it was a myth that women didn't work. It was only a small subset of rich women who didn't work throughout history. Like, and it was only with the invention of the dishwasher that they could get out the home. Like, nothing else really mattered. Like, real talk, like the amount of manual labor that goes into taking care of a home in the past before we had technology was huge. Like, the idea that women didn't work is a lie. They worked a lot. It's just and what they did was very valuable.
The lie has been told that the other things were more lofty and shiny, the career shit, the capitalism, and the gender empowerment shit. That they even say shit like it comes out of their fucking mouth. They say stuff like, "Yeah, just a housewife, to be just a mother," whereas it's not the only function, but it's a key function that we described for society. it is a prestigious role, like you just said. Like, holy shit, it takes a lot of fucking work to get the household together. But now, no, now it's more fucking important to post 50 fucking pictures on Instagram every day, you know? Just like as a comparison or something else, you know? Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, for sure, man. And if you look at historically as well, with the original suffragette movement, which was started in Britain, it was, or I don't know if it started in Britain, but the suffragette movement was in Britain anyway.
Yeah.
And it was the upper class women who wanted to get into academia, wanted to get into specific fields rather than anything else. Like, and yeah, maybe they should have been allowed to do that, but it wasn't like some huge liberating movement for every woman as it's now portrayed. But that's by the by, right? That's not really that important. What we're talking about in terms of the negative effects of like sexual promiscuity, right? So feminism and the sexual revolution in particular in the 60s, which second or third wave feminism, that for me is the most destabilizing aspect of it.
Okay.
Because when we get to the point where, so I believe there are biological consequences to having multiple sexual partners.
Sure.
Okay, and I don't think this is cultural. I think this is written into our DNA. And I put all the reasons and I put my references and everything in the book.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go through all them now, right? Yeah. But Fiore can say it's fully referenced. It's
it was put there for naysayers or people who say source or proof, but everything had a statistic that proved the point that you were making.
Yeah, I mean, I got to play under the rules of the system, right? So, and yeah, so women especially who engage in promiscuity, and it does it as well for men, but it is a lesser effect for men. I think that statistically plays out again, but it still hurts men, promiscuity. But promiscuous women are more likely to have, like, drastically more likely to have mental health problems, anxiety, depression, as well as other mental health problems such as schizophrenia and bipolar and multiple. What's the other one?
Just general anxieties.
Yeah,
it's a lessening of their mental well-being. And what's really interesting, I didn't per se see this like a corollary, but it was, how do I say, like the pair bonding gets they suffer from less pair bonding. Not to say that men don't have this as well, again, but women have this more statistically and empirically, anecdotally, and people will say like, yeah, that's just bullshit. But you can see it in that one statistic that gets brought up a lot. Women, as their sexual partners increase, the chance of them getting a divorce increase as well. That is a very potent statistic that gets thrown a lot around. It's, in my opinion, because of a certain psychological stability, where, you know, women are usually already a little bit, sometimes more chaotic. Of course, you have the outliers, whatever, you have the atypical women, but they're usually a little bit more chaotic, are more in tune with their emotions and stuff like that. And one can imagine that if these psychological barriers are a little bit loosened, this then transfers to their stability in a relationship and how they can manage it and envision a proper structure and the trajectory of a marriage or one big monogamous relationship for the rest of your life. They cannot hold that together then, apparently. And this is the reason why.
Yeah, for sure. And as you say, it plays out in statistics and it plays out anecdotally as well. I mean, how many, like, just think about it. How many of your friends are gonna wife up a hoe? You know,
zero.
Who wants to do that?
Yeah,
no one wants to do that. No one wants to do that. They might use her for some sexual gratification when they're horny, right? But then they don't want to marry her. No. And that's not some cultural thing. It's cross-cultural. It spans the world. It's born into our DNA, born into our genetics, because it's a very obvious signifier that this woman isn't wife-worthy material.
Yeah.
And you may not like that truth, but it is the truth, unfortunately, if you are a woman who's engaged in a lot of sex. So I should say, like, sex itself is fine. Like, I'm very sex positive. Like, sex is good for people, right? It's very, very important. But it has to.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah. But it has to be held within a healthy environment.
Exactly.
It has to be done within I think I said in the book, I think I used a protective cloak of mores and morals, something along words to those effect, because I think it really needs that, and historically has always had that, because when we don't have those protections in place, you know, you get things like HIV, syphilis, gonorrhea, all these things which in the past we couldn't cure. You know, HIV we still can't.
Yeah.
You know, but we also have the mental health consequences. These are all obvious biological tells that this is not something you should be engaging with.
Yeah.
And that is casual sex, or sex with multiple partners, not sex with your wife, which is safe. You know, you're going to have children. And pregnancy, I mean, that's a risk. I mean, it is a risk if you get a woman pregnant, or a woman gets pregnant when she's not with the partner. That's a huge toll on her life in whatever way it may be. And I talk about contraception and the way contraception was a big part of this, technology in general. So I think another theme I kind of went through is a while ago I wrote the book, but it's like technology has attempted to override biology. Oh yeah. And in some ways it has, right? Yeah. Some ways it has overridden biology. You can take the pill, get an implant, and you're not going to get pregnant. Yeah. But the problem is that we are a very complex system, both individually, in terms of like our own biological makeup as a person, but also as a culture. And when we started mixing these things with technology, it's caused all kinds of second and third order effects, which is what we're kind of discussing here. Yeah, no, that was definitely an interesting aspect because the pill and the contraception was tied around the sexual revolution, because the whole idea of it is that there was no consequence anymore. So the cultural, traditional, familial protective cloak was gone, so slowly loosened up. It's not totally gone in some culture, it still exists, but gets slowly loosened. Coupled, so women are already more empowered or free to do whatever they want. Okay, that can be fine in certain aspects. They can achieve academia, whatever, you know. But in terms of like the risk that we talked about, the promiscuity and the degeneracy, couple that with the pill, well, you got like clusterfuck, because now there's literally no consequence to that. Also from the man's side, because what you just described is that if a man knows in a certain village and there's a certain prestige that he has to uphold, if a woman gets pregnant, well, bro, you're part of the tribe, you know, you have responsibility. Now, what do you have? People run away, you know? Yeah, for sure. And they've tried to enforce responsibility, but, you know, you can't replace a man with a paycheck. You know, child support is not a father, you know, I mean, no, this is where honor and virtue comes in. It has to come from the self, you know, they have to understand it. So, yeah, for sure. And one of the things you said, there's no consequences. What I would say is there's no immediate consequences. That's the problem. There's been a diffusion of consequences. You're putting it off into the future. Same way you eat a cake, you feel fine, but then you eat a cake every day. 5 years time, you've got a belly, and your estrogen levels are through the roof. That diffusion, what you said, like it's like a delayed. It's the reverse of a gratification, because usually people have like a delayed gratification when you're working on long goals, whatever, versus instant gratification hits. Whereas now what you're describing, these instant gratificational hits that they're actually taking in terms of like promiscuity, degeneracy, and whatever, is actually diffusing and delaying the consequences down the line on the micro level. You as a person, but on a macro level on society. That's why what we're seeing now, this whole overarching fucked up shit going on now, is like some people are like, how did this happen? Or some people are still blind to it, you know. They don't see it a lot. They don't see it, but it's like a parasite, or like a fucking octopus web that stuck its fucking fingers in the whole like skeleton of society. So yeah, and like the other thing about this is this diffusion of responsibility and this diffusion of consequences. Sorry, it's a better way. You can see this all over our culture, in every aspect of our culture, actually. Like if you look at things like how, you know, the like food, okay, the way that food is like this, you know, if you're aware of this, is scientific studies that are done into how can you pack the most amount of calories into food without where it overrides like the taste overrides your bodily response. So there's certain foods that you will just eat and you keep eating them and you never feel satiated. You never feel full. Now you get an immediate reward, which is good. You get the positive response. It tastes good, right? The immediate negative response has been diffused through this has been researched, right? I don't know if you're aware of this. Like food companies do this. I think it's a combination of fat and carbs. If you get this right ratio of the fat and carbs, people can eat it and they don't feel like they're getting full.
That would make sense.
So you never get
because protein releases leptin or ghrelin. One of the ghrelin makes you hungry. Leptin makes you satiated. And it's higher, the satiation is higher for protein and fat. So if you manipulate it with more carbs, the satiation is not there on a chemical hormonal level. Some people can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah.
Yeah, and well, you've just broke down what exactly happens, and you get the point where you can eat a huge pack of crisps or donuts or whatever it might be, and you never get the satiation response. You never get that sick feeling where after you're trying to eat 2 steaks and like you got 2 more eggs there, and you're like, you get that point, you're like, man, I literally cannot eat anymore, right? Like you never get that with these foods. So you've had that is that negative response. It's the equivalent of the shame culture, or the immediate response tells you this act is not good, time to stop eating, you've ate enough, you don't need any more calories. We've had a diffusion of that now, and look at the average person around you. You can look at it in social media. Like social media, you get the instant dopamine response from your notifications, but you don't see the rewiring of the brain that's happened on social media, which has been studied as well. And and anybody who's on social media, or who's studied social media, or knows these social media companies, is this has also been weaponized. They understand how the brain chemistry works, that you get addicted to these platforms, and they cause all kinds of problems. We're probably both Twitter addicts, So
I was 100% aware of that, so I cut that shit back. I was not gonna be there like every 10 minutes or some shit. Some people do that. I'm done with that shit, because I knew what was gonna happen for a long-term effect. I couldn't even read a fucking article, much less a book, which meant I couldn't even write long-form content. It's all second order, third order effects. I was like, no, this is not gonna happen with me. I can use it on a minimalistic level. I can leverage it, social media, but yeah, coming back to the main tangent, you hinted already, you were saying like, no friend is gonna wife up a hoe. So, but you already hinted at the importance of virginity. But specifically, how do you think the importance of the female virginity played like a historical, cultural, and now these days, right now in a relationship? What's the role, in your opinion? The importance of it, how do you see that?
So the importance of it is like, comes down to sex and like my view on sex. So sex is a very spiritual and emotional act, in my opinion, or it should be, it can be. And traditionally sex was wrapped up as a social, emotional, spiritual, and physical affair. And when you have sex with someone, you are entering into an almost emotional bond with them, or a spiritual bond with them. Now, if the woman has never had sex and the man has never had sex as well, it'd be even deeper, and you have sex with each other, that is a very deep bond, which when it's never shared with anyone else, creates a very good foundation for a monogamous relationship, because you've never shared that with anyone else. So it becomes special to the two of you. Now, when that is shared with everyone, you no longer have this special connection through the sexual act, which connects you and keeps you glued together and tied together. So I think that's where it really comes from. And again, and I think there's other things. I think there's biological things that take place. The idea of imprinting is a real thing on women. When men and women have sex, the man enters the woman, not the other way around. I mean, I don't know, it shouldn't be. And that in itself has that has consequences, that has psychological consequences. And especially when it comes to trust and things, like when a woman has to have sex, when a woman has sex with a man, it means she should trust him, because she's allowing him to come inside of her.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He's entering
It's
entering her
it's
body.
very penetrative on a literal physical level, but emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. I 100% agree with your view. There are multiple pillars or facets to like sex, but that's a longer topic, maybe for like a sequel or whatever.
Mhm.
But it's so, yeah, imprinting, so penetrative, but also a little bit damaging. But it's okay if it's in a well intended relationship, in a well informed community, whatever, because that's meant to happen on a biological evolutionary level.
Mhm.
But the yeah the on the level that it's happening, it cannot be other than destructive, how it's happening with some people.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think when you just have it with each other as well, like there's also other psychological effects that come into play in terms of respect and um, comparison. I talk about comparison a little bit in the book as well, how like if a woman had, like, for a true marriage to work, right, the woman has to submit to the man and demands
Yeah, yeah.
authority. Now,
Yeah.
submission has a bad connotation in today's words, but generally means that she accepts him as the leader and is
Yes.
willing to follow him,
Yeah.
basically. And he's able to guide her through life rather than like drag her, right? He's supposed to be guiding her, and it's supposed to be with trust and with love.
It's a very mutual exchange.
Yes.
One wants to be
Yes.
led.
And it's hard for a woman to submit to a man when she's always comparing him to other men.
Yeah, I know what
this,
you mean. Yeah, you touched upon that in your book, because one man is always going to be weaker in one domain. He could be have less money physically. He could be a little bit less smarter. And if she's had 100 guys, the fuck you have to be fucking Bruce Wayne to be at the fucking top. Yeah.
and it just causes, again, it's not like this isn't some deterministic thing. It's not like because you've had sex with another person you can't have a good marriage, right? No, it's just about probabilistically it makes it harder.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And that's why it's more common. Not all people get divorced that've done this, but it's more common with people like that. Just to make that clarification, it's not like we're saying like you have sex with another man, you're done, you're damaged goods. No, we're just saying it's optimal in this situation, right? It's about probabilities and percentages.
Probabilistically, yeah. And that's what's so funny is that when people have the topics that we're talking about on lock, both genders, men and female, if they understand this intuitively, culturally, or their fucking parents fucking taught them in the fucking right way, then what's funny, this statistically and probabilistic stuff that we're talking about, they intuit this. It's a reflex. Like Daniel Kahneman talks about the system one. You have a fast mind and a slow mind. They know it instantly. No, I'm not gonna go to the club. I have X amount of partners. This is enough. I have to make my choice from both sides. Or I cannot just do this. I have responsibilities. Or as a man, I'm just gonna focus on my work. Then gotta get a good wife. They know this because they're raised from the ground up as a child, as a baby. They know what to do. And for some people it's lost. That's why it's important, I feel, that at least I have to talk about this once in my lifetime, on this thing. But yeah, coming back, like what's interesting, you already hinted at that imprinting. I want to talk a little bit about, maybe for some people, a little bit more esoteric or pseudoscience. You mentioned something in the book called maybe I'm not pronouncing it well, telegony, or maybe tied to microchimerism, which I'm more familiar with. I studied as well. But what's your thought on that? Could you elaborate a little bit in a nutshell what it is for people who've never heard of this concept in their life?
So it's the idea that when a woman has sex with a man, that some element of his DNA lives on within her. Now, it may not be necessarily the sperm or the semen, but like that sperm or semen maybe leaves a residue or some kind of residual impact on her. So when she then goes forward and has sex with other men, there is almost I don't want to say like a mingling of genetics, but they have those previous sexual partners have an impact on the child, on the child, the way that the genetics or the DNA of the child. And this is a very old theory. I know there's some tribal, I think Amazonians, I can't remember exactly where, tribal Amazonians have this belief, and they would actually have the woman, like when she wanted to get pregnant, like literally have sex with all the strongest men in the village,
yeah.
so that they would get, because they believe this would bring the strongest child, it would take all the best parts of the strongest men and give the best chance of making like kind of a super baby. Like so the way I kind of talked about it is why it has a kind of a mental effect in terms of virginity on men, because there will be some kind of a closer bond with the child, because it will be just purely their genetics. And especially in
we're talking actually about the truth of your paternity. Actually, if you have a virgin and it's only your DNA, that's what we're talking about, then it's your child, you know, if you take a blood test, whatever, paternity. But now it's in dispute, given this like hypothesis or theory, if multiple men have lingering DNA or whatever, then this is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. And it might even be some of the cases about like some of the because I know there's a famous study in England, I think I referenced this in the book as well, like 1 in 10 British children don't have the father that they thought they had biologically. Like they did DNA tests and 1 in 10 their father wasn't their father. Now, was that because the mum was a hoe during the time, or maybe there is some impact that it was just because before, and that's why it's so prevalent? Is actually because there is some of this kind of these theories that we're talking about. Now, I will say this has never been kind of proven by like science. I give one. Maybe you go.
Actually, so I want to first bring up the study that Jack wants to mention. It's about the fly, you mean, right? I think.
The fruit flies.
There's like a big study on fruit flies they've done, that a fly first had one sexual partner that was like a big fly, and then the fly had another sexual encounter with a smaller fly, and then afterwards she got pregnant by supposedly the second one. But still, if they compared size and how it grew, it had the size of the first partner, not the second. So this is just a theory in terms of like, bro, you're just talking about flies. But I want to tie it with another study that I was doing some research on, tied to like microchimerism. It's almost non-existent. So SEO tries to fucking hide that shit. I just want to bring this out, that you cannot even research this. Like, you know, like maybe it's real, maybe it's not, but let me do my fucking research. Let me try to find it. But what you'll find is 1 or 2 studies, whereas they were just trying to check the DNA in women who had abortion. They were not trying to find anything that we're talking about. What was completely interesting is that they found male DNA for women who've had abortions on a higher percentage. We're talking about statistics again. So if you have a woman who's never been pregnant, or had maybe she had a baby boy already, she was pregnant with a boy, there was still some male DNA residue in her percentage wise. But then they've also tested, like that's what they do, a larger sample testing. They had like women who had abortions, and what did they found on a statistic level? About 20% or 30% of the women had male DNA in them, but they were never pregnant. You know, like we're not going to talk about the levels when you're pregnant or when the child is in you with abortion. But what this means, they didn't even want to draw that conclusion, but there was a throwaway line. What are the causes that male DNA was in a woman? Well, multiple male sexual partners, or it could be the fetus. So one of the two. But there is no other explanation how the male DNA would get into her. Maybe from her father, then, you know, a genetic misalteration or whatever. But this was just one study that, if, in my opinion, if they would fund this, what it's now never going to happen anymore, given what the fuck is going on. But if they do more research on this, you can make clear hypotheses and conclusions about this that people are afraid to talk about, apparently. Yeah, I just want to.
Yeah, and I wasn't aware of that, and that's super interesting. Actually, that's really, really interesting. There's been a long historical belief in what we're talking about. This isn't some new thing. Yeah, Greek. In my research, I think they found it back to Greek mythology, but I'm sure it goes back even further, you know. And as I mentioned, there's the Amazonian tribe who had this kind of belief system as well. I believe it's Amazonian, I can't remember. So, you know, sometimes science can be great in many ways, but it can also blind us to certain realities that we haven't yet explored during our scientific discoveries, right? Or like you say, you have this scientific study, but it's never gone into deeper detail, so you never actually know the actual truth of it, right? And or until the future, science is always in a constant state of flux, or it should be. Which brings us to another point about believe the science, right? But we'll probably dodge that one. Then we'll be hidden by SEO.
No, you touched on that a little bit in your book as well, that you have to take some science with a grain of salt, and especially, I really like that angle. You were talking about the pill and big pharma and how they bury certain studies. You didn't even go deeper into that. You said like, you can take my word for it or not, you know, you can do your own research, but they bury certain studies, you know. That was fascinating.
And it actually became really, really pertinent considering what's going on at the moment, you know, and pharmaceutical companies. There's a guy on Twitter, Adam Townsend, who's super smart dude. I don't know, if you follow him, he always brings out this statistic that last year, Big Pharma spent $10 billion on advertisements on social media alone. Like $10 billion on advertisement. What does $10 billion get you? You know, like, I mean, that's a lot of money.
That's a fuck ton. So this is what I'm talking about. How, of course, it's okay. Like the contraception is like new technology, new science. Okay, I'm all for advancement, but advancement has also been tied to the decline that we've talked about, tied to the degeneracy, the sexual wanton, abandon, whatever. But it ties into capitalism. And basically capitalism is being served by big pharma. And who's behind big pharma? We don't have to go into that shit. But if you think about it, cui bono, like who benefits from this shit? If you think about it from a very homo economicus, rational, logical point of view, like somebody's profiting from this shit, profiting from your body, you know, you as a woman, and also as a man, whatever. It's not healthy, you know. So yo, you still there, Jack? You froze a little bit. Yo, Jack, you there? We're back. So no, like let's take it with a lighter angle. We were going down a rabbit hole. There's some concepts.
Yeah, that's why they shut us off.
Like it's right there. It's right there.
Mate, have you noticed that only time these things drop out is when you talk about that kind of stuff?
I will keep it.
I swear. I will
keep it in focus. I don't want to go too deep down that hole, but it might be true because, in my opinion, they're tapping my phone. So I already know they're fucking tapping. The advertisements you get always, they hear it. If I talk now about, Iceland seems really nice, you know, it's going to be on my fucking phone, you know.
Yeah, man. And I know who owns Zoom, so.
Let's talk about a very cool concept that I found that you coined. It's called virtuous masculinity. Can you tell us a little bit what it is and what do you think its role is going to be in my opinion, the course correcting, because I want to stay hopeful and optimistic in our society. How do you see that go?
Yeah, so virtuous masculinity is kind of what I would say is kind of the optimal masculinity. We talk about masculinity a lot in our scene, and a lot of people, like, you know, red pill, they always talk about masculinity, but I don't see that stuff as a virtuous masculinity. So virtuous masculinity is the idea that men have a role to play as like the patriarchs and the paternal leaders of the family and therefore culture, and that they should be virtuous and use their strength. The idea of the civilized savage kind of comes into it, that you should be strong, powerful, have the ability to inflict harm, be able to inflict harm, but choose not to unless the circumstances deem it necessary. That's just one example of virtuous masculinity. It's being able to lead people.
And
it's being a leader.
Yeah, and it's been a Greek concept. There's that famous Aristotle or Plato quote, to be both, well-rounded, you know, very savage-like in your physicality, but also intelligent and virtuous.
Yeah, and that's basically it in a nutshell. You know, that's it. You gotta take care of your dependents,
Yeah.
do things not purely from a selfish view. You should be looking at things at the bigger picture. You should have a benevolent picture for the world.
Yeah.
That means, especially for leadership, and like, but it has to come from the culture, right? We can't, we can still make the world a good place through each of our own actions, right? If everyone acted in the right way, and I know in reality this doesn't work out, but theoretically, if everyone could act in the right way, we'd live in a good world, right?
Yeah.
It's the same principle, but it's also the principles of leadership. It's what I talk about in the book. Like, now our leaders are not benevolent.
Yeah.
They no longer, they're self-serving. And, you know, to some degree, you have to be, like, part of being masculine is realizing, okay, at this point, I have to take care of my needs over the needs of someone else, right? But in general, you should be looking at the bigger picture. How does this influence? What are the effects going to be on this? And, you know, we're not omniscient. We can't see the future, but we do know inherently that something's the wrong thing to do. And part of our virtuous masculinity is to then not give in to the temptation or whatever that might be, but to do the right thing that guides people into a better future, whether it be your children, your wife, your family, your work, or if you know, a ruler of a country, whatever it might be.
Yeah. So I almost heard from I'm not gonna say utilitarian function, but more like an individualistic intent to solve things on a micro level will then benefit the macro level, the society, on a longer scale, on a longer timeline. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and being aware of the macro, like, so it's also, it's not just that, it's also knowing that, like, sometimes, you have to do the unpleasant thing in the moment because it's good on the macro scale. And you have to be capable of doing that unpleasant thing. So it is on the micro level doing the right thing, but also being aware of the macro and how the two interplay, because they do. And knowing that, for example, we talked about contraception, how that on the macro level, that macro level change affected everyone's on the micro level. Yeah. So is that a good thing to release? You know, so.
Yeah, what I want to go deeper a little bit in is you've touched upon it a little bit already, the role of monogamy, because we're talking now a little bit in terms of solutions. I want to leave the audience with like not a bad taste in the mouth, you know, what I talked about. Like, no, these dark things, if you think too much about it, and you can see how I look, how intense I get. But of course, there are positive sides, such as the virtuous masculinity, but also the role of monogamy. How do you think, like, it's gonna create a solution? Because in the later parts of your chapter, you try to give like antidotes or a potential solution or mental models or models for society. How do you see like patriarchy coupled with monogamy? How do you see that going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's basically the way I see it. So I see it twofold. I see there being twofold solutions. There's either got to be, and it's probably requires both,
sure,
or one will come from the other. So the level you're talking about there is, like, take care of yourself, like, look after your health, become the kind of man that is going to be a good leader of his family, find a good woman, wife her up, and have a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And that's gonna have a ripple effect onto society as you pass your values down to those, and each of those children will hopefully have their own family. And, you know, long term, especially when you look at demographic shifts in terms of liberals and you know, feminists, in terms of how many kids they're going to have, it's going to have a demographic shift over time that moves to the point where the only people who will be dominant in culture will be basically like Christian fundamentalists, like the kind of bro guys we've got on Twitter, and then like immigrant populations who still retain their religion. So they're going to be suddenly the wider demographic force. And in that way, you'll shape culture going forward, right? And also you shape it in the right way by helping them be the good, virtuous leader people. This is actually why I ended up being a relationship coach, is because I realized that a lot of people have problems with relationships, and they might be good people and they just need some help in the right directions. And the foundation of the family is to get a good relationship. You can't get married to a woman if you can't have a good relationship with her. So that's kind of why I moved in that area, because it fits in so well with my principles, and there's a way I can extend my impact on the world as just one person with very little power, right? I've got an iPhone. and I do what I can with this iPhone. But the other aspect is also the political aspect. And that'll either come out of these kind of people we're talking about, or men who do end up growing and developing, and they naturally get inclined to a more political kind of bent. If you look at the Cernoviches of the world, for example, that's an example of someone who's basically done that path. And he's now a very influential man, right? And he's come out of our scene on Twitter as just as an influencer and become a political force, right? There's going to be more people like that, and we have to have these people that come in and get inside organizations, do the reverse of the Marxists, which I also talked about in the book, get inside academia and just reverse the process, and eventually, hopefully, it'll come around and get into those positions of power and be able to enact change. Now, the problem is those institutions are pretty sewn up, so it's going to be tough, right? Which is why I think you need the both aspects of it as well.
It's beautiful. I really like that twofold approach. Personally, I'm more hopeful for on the individualistic level, what you just described. People to people, spreading the word, living the life. That's all I can do as well, just doing this. This is my my contribution, because what you're describing, like, if we go down the fucking rabbit hole of like Marxism, Leninism, socialism, all this fucking shit, this podcast is gonna take 5 hours, how to breach like all the institutions of illusion, how you describe it in a book, because it's so entrenched, it's stuck, it's because these are like almost like atavistic symbols, almost like, how you have these Jungian archetypes, which is another concept.
Man.
It's so in society, historically, culturally, it's so stuck in our ways. You have these like big institutions that are pulling these gigantic levers that create these mass effects, such in this case feminism is just a smaller thing, which leads to like the exploitation of women and stuff like that. But it's these big hands that pulling these big motherfucking levers, like, you can't even begin to like, you can just like talk about it on a like a mouth to mouth, face to face level. Like, there's nothing else you can do, in my opinion, on without taking too much time, energy,
and risk.
It's a risk.
And and even the mouth to mouth has been taken away from us in the past year and a half. So it's these things are all connected. And we mentioned, one of the things I mentioned about the pill and why I think the pill got so widely adopted is as a profit motive. If you get half the population, women, taking a pill every day from the age of, in Western countries, from the age of 14, 16 until their menopause. In their, nowadays, by the way, menopause is coming out earlier and earlier, by the way, guys. It used to be in your 50s. Now it's, if you're in your 40s, it's already knocking on the door. And if you get them to take this throughout their life, I mean, that's a huge amount of money, man.
And what is super insidious, I want to touch upon one angle, is that I think I read it in your book. They give it even to women who aren't sexually active. They create a narrative. It's not even a sexual narrative. This is pure evil, that you just have to take the pill for health reasons, whereas it has almost 0 to detrimental / negative health benefits if you're not sexually active, if you do not need it to prevent your pregnancies, whatever. Just, you're putting extra chemicals, extra unnecessary, unnatural hormones in your body, and this is all propagated with this like almost like Goebbels like propaganda. We're going back to the Third Reich shit. That is just this is how I see it. So sometimes when I read this,
I agree.
It's so creepy, so and then and what's so funny, this is the fascist shit, whereas if you talk about masculinity and stuff like that, they call you now this side fascist, but I want to, like, before we drift off too far, I had an important thing that you mentioned is that some cultures with certain religions, they still manage, so we haven't touched upon the removal of religion, how this has facilitated this speeding up of this decline, this degeneracy, this negativity that we're talking about. How do you see the role of faith, religion, and for some other people, spirituality? How do you see that?
So the reason I put such a big weight on religion is because the strength of belief that accompanies people that hold religious values. So once you remove that kind of foundation that people have, that it's like, no, this is what, you know, the Bible says, this is what Al Quran says, this is what the Torah says, whatever it might be. I've just picked all the Abrahamic religions, but never mind. But whatever it might be, like this gives you, this is what is correct. Yeah. Whatever you're telling me is wrong. You can't argue with that. You can't argue with people like that because they have a very firm, I mean, if we want to use the game term, they have an incredibly firm frame. You can't shake their frame. They have an unshakable frame. And once you remove those underpinnings, which is one of the interesting things about the fluidity of science and why science is such a useful belief system to people in power, is that it's incredibly fluid and that you can move it in certain directions because it is by nature unstable. Now that's not a bad thing, right? As long as you have the two together. I think one of the big problems we've had is the unpinning of morality from social norms. And I think the strongest forms of morality are undoubtedly religious ones. So once religion gets taken away in a country and removed in a country, such as in Europe, where we're both from, in Britain, like there is no religion, right? No one is Christian in Britain. And you look the extent in Britain, it's way higher than even in America. In America, the only places where this stuff is super rampant are the hyper liberal areas, New York, Los Angeles, California, etc. But if you still go to a Christian area of America, they still really maintain these values. And the values don't creep in the same way. They do, but you can just see how much more resistant they've been. They're almost a mimetic resistance. I think I talked about that in the book as well, right?
I don't think it's about mimetic, but it's very potent, what you just described, this resistance. I don't talk to this friend anymore, but I used to know a very devout Hindu person. He believed in the polytheistic gods, everything. He knew everything. He talked about the Kali Yuga, all the yugas, whatever. My point is, this guy, he was steadfast in his core beliefs, his identity, that I was talking just with him. I was that degenerate then. I was trying to take him to clubs and whatever. He said, no, I just need one woman, one wife, and she needs to be a virgin. I'm going to fix that. I'm going to have kids. And that's is good for this and this reason, because it's told to me, this is what I've been taught, whatever. And back then I was a little bit younger, you know, I couldn't understand that. But now looking back and seeing the role of that, like his spirituality, his religion, how that became such a core foundation of him, and not only him, but what we're seeing some people still have it, is that it gives stability against the entropic effects of just listening to lust and all the sins, we need to stop the entropy, the chaos. We need to create a little bit more structure, because that's what humans are good at, actually, to fight against the river, dam the river of chaos,
and that has been undammed undeniably, and that's what I try and show in the book. And we haven't even really talked about the some of the other stuff, some of the main thesis of the book. Really, it's because I think there is other motives, like we talked about money and stuff, but I think there's other ulterior motives as well behind this undamming. And like I mentioned, and like you say, if you have this faith, whether it be Hindu faith or it be Christian, whatever it is, you will stick to that. And it's very hard for you to be manipulated by whoever's in power at that time, right? So if you remove that foundation, you remove that dam, it all comes swelling out. And you can see this even from countries, and how they have adopted certain behaviors, and how look at the mental health rates, happiness rates. That's one of the other things. Ever since this has happened, everyone's got chronically depressed, and happiness levels are at the lowest they've ever been.
And what's really strange, actually, now that you're talking about this, is that the mental health issues are for both genders now, because you see more and more men we can talk about that. I have like a final big question, because maybe people are seeing here that I'm painting women or these like entities that are influencing people, but men are to blame as well, and specifically the feminization of men that I want to talk about in a bit. But what's so creepy is that even now during the COVID lockdowns and stuff where I live, is that on the news now, I kid you not, little children have to go to therapy. I'm not saying that children on a statistic probabilistic level can't get depressed or whatever, but if you look at past data, whatever, in other pandemics or other crises and stuff like that, children were always children, if you're going to do your research. And now this trend is coming up that children are depressed because they were supposed to stay at home. They couldn't play with their friends anymore and stuff like that. They were imposed on their freedom and stuff like that. So we're talking about other stuff on top of what is going on. But I feel that what we're seeing now with the children is a trickle down effect of how also men are having mental health issues, and women. I'm not saying everybody, but statistically it's coming more and more prevalent. And I know some elderly people who, they are more like a little bit old school. They would say it in a very like, yeah, almost nonsensical line. They would say this didn't exist when I was younger. What they mean is the data wasn't there. It wasn't that prevalent. It wasn't talked about. Depression existed a long time. You can probably find it like in the Middle Ages, whatever. But the elderly people that I know, they say, what the fuck is this? Why is this kid now depressed? Why are these people now depressed? When I was younger, depression didn't exist. What they mean is, what is, I can't put my finger on it. Something is happening, They intuit this how Shakespeare would say this, that the time is out of joint, meaning there's this shifting of society on like a bigger level, and we're feeling the trickle down effects just with our mental health, So.
Yeah, for sure, man. And if you really want to fit it into the thesis of the book, if you look at what the effect childhood trauma has on sexual promiscuity, it's highly correlated. So it doesn't necessarily, that kind of trauma is gonna cause big consequences in these kids' lives. And one of the theses behind the book is that this is that everything has been an open up to sexual exploitation of people. So that is even that feeds into this narrative that I'm talking about now, whether it's on purpose, whether it's not.
Like that. Yeah. No, yeah, you can go ahead. That's a beautiful connection that you made it there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is on purpose, right? Like I can't say that. I don't know their motives. All I can look at is where everything's going.
Yeah.
Everything trends in that direction for whatever reason. So.
Yeah. So we can just do our part, us men, that ties perfectly in what I want to talk about. Like, how do you feel, what's the role of men gonna be, and what can they do against this feminization? How can they take ownership for themselves, us as men you're talking about? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately I put this down at the hands of men. I don't blame women for what's happened at all. Actually, I blame men, because ultimately we are the leaders, we are the defenders of culture, we are the people who typically are in leadership roles and were in leadership roles at the unveiling of all this disaster. So I also see it on men's backs to fix it as well. And I think the best way to do that is to, on an individual level, you have to take control of your life, avoid feminization, avoid the biological toxins that surround us, whether they be in our food or elsewhere, that are emasculating us. You look at testosterone levels. All those exactly. They're everywhere, man. They're in everything. You can't avoid them completely, but you can do your best. You literally cannot avoid them. It's like physically impossible. Yeah. But you can do what you can, right? And you can limit your exposure in the ways you can. And obviously, like, I know it's so cliche in our part, but lift weights. There's a reason we all say it. It is really important to lift weights, keep fit, eat right, and that's kind of the beginning. That's why so many people, that's how they start, right? And then they come into all this and they realize, like, oh, what we've been told about food and health is all total crap. I start doing this and I feel amazing, right? Like, what is this? What?
It's that first catalyst, that we're talking about. Because some accounts that I follow, they all say, yo, bro, we got bigger things to think about, bigger things to care about. If you cannot even take care of your basic nutrition, your training, or your basic, yeah, for some bros, you know, they can't get women or can hold a stable relationship. Like, bro, there are bigger things going on. What we've hinted at, you know, like bigger societal shit going on. If you cannot even pick up a fucking weight, you know, cannot even take care of your fucking self. Like, how we gonna like fight this war, you know, something like that. They want to insinuate that, you know, like, but yeah, you have to strengthen yourself first, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah, and it's the best way to take back control, and it's the most important step. I think everything else kind of flows from your health to a degree. It's really important. It's. I always like to say, like, your health is like the lens through which you live life.
Yeah.
Right. It's like when your health is bad, everything is negative.
Yeah.
You know, when your health is good, everything's more positive. I don't want to say everything's great, but everything just gets better, right? Everything gets easier.
Yeah.
It is the lens through which you experience life. So that really is at the core of it.
Yeah. So yeah, Jack, we've talked about all these things for like an hour or something, or more. I'm gonna wrap it up soon, and so I'm gonna give you the final word. You can talk about, like, for example, your relationship coaching, if you want to talk a little bit about that, or any just closing remarks in general. The things that we've talked about, you know, it can be inspirational, motivational, or just your peace of mind. You can go ahead.
Yeah, man. I suppose it would be good to kind of link all these things together. So, like, obviously, I have wrote a book about this. You can always get the book.
Yeah, I'll plug the link.
Fury, say what you said before you came on air. Like, tell the people what you thought of it.
Oh yeah. So me and Jack are a huge fan of noir mysteries, and specifically the PI genre of the 1950s and 60s, where there's a famous author who is called the Shakespeare of crime. His name is Raymond Chandler. If you don't know him, look him up. He has this character called Philip Marlowe, who's the PI, who unearths, yeah, these cabalic dark mysteries in societies just through like whodunit murder mysteries, you know. And what's really fascinating about Jack's book that I had the pleasure to read, the privilege to read, it was the topic was nonfiction. It was a very heavy topic about things that I don't like to read about. I'm not gonna read this for like light entertainment, but it was insightful, but it was construed in a way that you were taken by Jack as the narrator, as if like you're a journalist or you yourself were a detective. You were going through a detective story, unraveling the layers of society, going from surface, just the feminism or the promiscuity on the surface level. These are just fucking symptoms. Then you go down the fucking rabbit hole into the deep and into the dark, into these bigger powers that are trying to sexually exploit children as the deeper, darker mystery. And it was beautifully written. I came up with this realization, like, holy fuck, what am I reading? It was true like that, just to peel away the layers and not just give you this instant, like, hey, conspiratorial shit, you know. But yeah, that was Jack's book. Yeah, it was good shit, man. I really, it was one of the best books that I read this year to this date. Yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. So yeah, obviously, if you want to read the dark noir novel of nonfiction, you can obviously give it a go. But yeah, to tie it all together, as I mentioned earlier on, like, this is kind of what led me to relationship coaching, right? Because being able to help guys fix their relationships and understand these things, but more importantly, it's like, we don't really talk about that kind of stuff really, like, but understand that there's been lies told to men about how they need to behave with women. Yeah. Like, and that these lies are what are causing their, either if they're single, their failure to get women, or their collapsed marriages. You know, this is one of the reasons divorces are so high as well, is because men don't know how to act. They're told by culture to act one way, and that's not actually the correct way to act, right? And the problem is, in our scene, we get a lot of people who take it too far, the other extreme, and then take it to the also negative end of masculinity. And instead of embodying that virtuous masculinity, still having that strength, but being able to use it with wisdom to guide people they go too far, and they also destroy relationships. So in one of my hopes to fix society, is one of my big pictures behind it, is to help guys navigate this and fix their problems with women. And not only does that, for my own selfish purposes, it means that I can help fix society to some degree. It also gives them a greater sense of self-worth. They get satisfaction, they get the relationship they always wanted. So, and that's critical for them as well as for culture at large. So if you do want some help with that, you can always reach out as well. Shoot me a message on Twitter.
On Twitter, yeah. Okay.
Twitter's the place. I also have a blog, thinkinpeach.com. Think in Peach. That's also my Twitter handle. Yeah. And I don't publish on that very often anymore. That deals with some of these sort of bigger topics, but I publish a newsletter 3 times a week, email list, which you can get off my Twitter, which I believe Fury is on as well.
Yeah. No, that's how I got acquainted to these topics, actually, because I saw the long format of Jack was very, it was deeper, it was well construed, and some things people just don't like to talk about on the timeline in real life, and it needs to be said, and that's why we brought Jack on. And I'll put all the necessary links in this YouTube video if somebody's interested after listening this whole while. So I just want to thank you, Jack. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to finally get a chance to speak with you in person. We've known each other a long time, but we've never actually talked like this. We bonded over Raymond Chandler, the guy we mentioned before. We always used to talk about Raymond Chandler. So.
Yeah, and incidentally, we've ended up talking about another noir story, so to say.
Yeah, the synchronicities.
It's uncanny, yeah. So thanks very much, Jack. And for people listening, like and subscribe, spread the word. If there's enough, positive feedback for this specific one, I'd like to bring Jack back or talk about these topics more often, because I personally don't like to talk about this because it can get you into this rabbit hole. But so keep spreading the word and just keep being free. HOOA.